Finally, I recognize that while the tangible aspects of place, its people and physical attributes, the deepest attachment is an aesthetic one. The emotional connection is based on an array of images of one's place, sifted and sorted, some forgotten, some embellished and remembered. The best words I find to describe this is the remembered beauty of the place. First, there's the beauty in our handwork when it is done, well done, and useful, the craftsmanship idea. This must be true for the watchmaker as well as the farmer. But when we try to craft a system that has its own agenda, such as a system of nature, the best we can hope for is a kind of graceful interference. Second, there's the aspect of self-justifying circularity in the argument that what we do well is necessarily beautiful. Can we call efficient human execution of a landscape beautiful? Is efficient bulldozing and burning of the rainforest beautiful? At least to some, at least to anybody. Beauty must be surely the result from matching a craft with sustainable purpose, and the purpose must be highly regarded by nature. Third, there is a problem of self-referencing education. That which in one society is considered ugly may come to be thought beautiful if it persists out of necessity, if for no other reason. Around here, a verdant field of soybeans and corn without the sign of another plant is considered by farmers a thing of beauty, even though these fields require large financial subsidies, special hybrids, heavy use of pesticides, and much mechanical tillage. Such a field viewed by a Kaskaskian native here in the 1600s would be seen as dangerous, as he would wonder where the supporting food plants were. These early people here planted as many as 3 different plants in essentially the same spot. Their careful choice and timing reveals an agricultural understanding which is rare today. Surely such a person saw their form of agriculture as beautiful. Our problem is then, what do we think of as beautiful? Every system of beauty needs a reference. While we can choose our own reference system, certain forces are at work these days in the U.S., if not in the world, to make that reference system nature itself, sustainable, self-reproducing, maintenance-free nature. So can the most permanent sense of place be based on this perception of beauty? Is there another standard of beauty than that of natural systems that can provide such a durable standard? Attempt to answer these questions. Solomon Rushdie, in his latest story, The Shelter of the World, speaks through an imaginary Queen Yoda in scolding her adventurous king. I quote her now. They came in search of what exactly? Nothing of use. If they possessed any wisdom, the inutility of their journey would have been obvious to them. Travel was pointless. It removed you from the place in which you had meaning, and to which you gave meaning in return by dedicating your life to it, and spirited you away into fairylands where you were and looked, frankly, absurd." Unquote. It seems that we have few alternative paths in life. Some people never leave their original place, or leave but eventually win their way back home. Others somehow learn to establish a new sense of place where they can hold fast. Some will continuously wander. Those who never leave home could have the deepest sense of place, and thus the most well-founded basis for environmental defense. Involved routinely in this defense, that sense for me is continually deepening. Those who start later must learn faster, but the involvement in environmental action is clearly a learning aid. In the words of Queen Yoda, those who fail to find their place lack meaning and do look, frankly, absurd. Brian Norton and I, a philosopher from the from Georgia Tech, and I described in detail the philosophy of a sense of place. One of our focuses was on identifying the non-transferable values associated with a place. These are the losses that truly weaken us when we leave our place. They could be memories of the birth of a child, a wedding, a walk with a grandchild, or the knowing of good neighbors. In moving, we translate these values from reality into memory and are diminished. These values can be associated with the physical aspects of the place or with the people and our interactions with that place. This sense of place, it seems to me, is defined by our continuing actions in defending that place from ill-conceived degradation, and in changing that place, to one that is more sustainable in the long run. It is paramount to connect to nature in your place if you wish your place to become sustainable. Sense of place is nature among us, not nature afar. It is knowing nature as a guide of sustainable actions, as a true source of beauty. We respect local nature as the indication of a past we once shared so intimately. Possessing a sense of place is a sufficient condition for connection to nature. The necessary condition is that there exists a nature in one's place available for connection. Well, then I go into a long description of the effects of childhood on a sense of place, the effects of my childhood on my sense of place. And I'm only able to read just excerpts from that because of the time available, but you can pick it all up in the paper, either here or in the back or on the website. But I will paraphrase it. The anthropologist Joseph Campbell championed the idea of group decision-making as a way to prevent or subdue conflict. And Bill Sullivan, I'd recommend you look at that work in your Reasonable Man effort. Pardon? Reasonable person, right. The reasonable person, reasonable men and women. The anthropologist Campbell did this, and then he says you cannot publicly argue for selfishness. That was his whole point. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman reminds us that our memories are of life-shaping experience depend mainly on the extremes of that experience and on how we felt at the end of those experiences. Columnist David Brooks, a conservative whose politics I don't agree with, but whose thought processes are magnificent, sums the results of many social science experiments by saying that our strong preference in community bonding is for the opposite of diversity. He points out that if you separate people in a community arbitrarily into different groups, each group will soon begin to discriminate itself against the other groups. These views seem to cover the variables that give rise to a sense of place. The small, now I skip, the small enclosed village of Ivesdale, not only all white but nearly all Irish Catholic, provided a backdrop of my childhood. All of my greats immigrated from Ireland in the late 1840s and settled in that area in which I was born and which I lived until I was in my mid-30s. And so when I go on to discuss local activities that were shaping my life at the time, and then talked about something that I think is relative to this workshop. Of course, Catholic Church. The church was a powerful influence on my sense of place in Ivesdale. I went to a Catholic elementary school taught by Benedictine nuns. They lived for the school year right next to the school. It seemed to us they were completely devoted to our education. An education that consisted of the very basics, reading, writing, and math. Each nun taught in one room with 4 grades. While the curriculum was necessarily abbreviated, we did have the value of lesson repetition. We could not prematurely advance in grades in those days, but we could be sent back a grade, and that was something that happened to maybe 10% of the students. The nuns were strict and seen as very special in their head-to-toe black habits, each with a dazzling white starch headdress and cowl. They're very impressive. In such a small community, the nuns, the parents, and the priest formed a tightly knit circle around their children. When coupled with the story of the Holy Family, the Sacred Familia, I could form the parallels. Just as Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were a special family, my mother and father and I were too, and so in a sense were the nun and the priest and I. This thoroughgoing tightness of these layered images, coupled with the smallness of the town, produced a profound control over all of us. And yet we, in growing up in this situation, were completely unaware of it.